This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Stay tuned to learn more about them later in the video. Game of Thrones is renowned for its unpredictable and groundbreaking twists that keeps viewers thoroughly engaged. To celebrate this, I wanted to rank all of the major plot twists given how iconic they consistently are. And to define a plot twist, as it can be vague, I'll be placing emphasis on two main points. Is the plot development sudden, unexpected, and shocking? And does it greatly change the story moving forward? So not every character death and shocking moment is a plot twist. Now, since we're ranking all of the major twists, there happens to be some bad ones. Number 51. Arya kills the Night King. When literally every other fanfiction comes up with a much better death for the Night King, then you're probably bad writers. Arya killing the Night King feels nothing more than a consolation prize, as David and Dan didn't know what to do with her character. This is one of the main points in the narrative that needed an epic payoff that was utterly squandered. Viserion guarding the entrance to the Godswood? Doesn't matter. The White Walkers being in the way? That's fine. Arya's Tracer from Overwatch. The Night King having super strength that can break her neck? Arya's wearing an iron neck brace of plot armor. It's just so baffling, breaking the logic of the story in so many ways for a character to kill the Night King that flat out doesn't deserve it. All in the name of subverting expectations, but I guess David and Dan kind of forgot about the notion of, in order to properly subvert expectations, you have to do it in a way that actually makes sense and that cohesively ties the overall narrative together. Number 50. Cersei and Jaime getting crushed by bricks. I was extremely reluctant to even put this moment on the list. I wanted to act like it doesn't even exist, but it does technically meet the definition of a plot twist, kind of. However, it does so in a comical way in which this is an unexpected outcome in the sheer sense that no one expected these characters to die to fucking bricks. Like, out of all the ways for these characters to die, this is the best you could come up with? Which this is entirely ignoring a multitude of other issues like that of Jaime's character regressing multiple seasons to even be here in the first place. Similar to Arya killing the Night King, there's so many other fan renditions of this scene, and if you want to see mine, then I just rewrote the episode in my latest Game of Thrones video that is hopefully better than this. Number 49. Dany destroys King's Landing. This is technically a plot twist, even though this was pretty heavily telegraphed. From an overarching story perspective, this plot point can be extremely effective, but the way David and Dan execute this completely robs the moment of any weight. There's not enough build-up to this massive shift for the internal landscape of Dany's character, making this turn come across as puzzling and utterly divorces the viewer from understanding what Dany is thinking. Especially since the surrounding landscape of the story doesn't make sense for her to snap in this moment. If anything, snapping after she's won the war and the enemy surrenders would be the least likely point for her to snap. She's now no more than this archetype to fulfill an arbitrary objective within the story, absolutely gutting the depth this wonderful character used to have. But don't think about all of that, there's pretty colors and explosions on screen. Wow, spectacle! Number 48. Tyrion's battle plans falling apart. If I was making this video like a year ago, this probably wouldn't be that low, but after remaking my Devoid of Logic for Season 7, there's a head-spinning amount of problems with this point in the story. From armies literally teleporting across the continent mid-episode, logistics and food being a non-factor, army sizes being all over the place, houses like Highgarden not even having armies, Dany only using her dragons once, fleets fast-traveling like the Flying Dutchman, and Jaime storming Highgarden with an AK-47, since they fell instantly. I go more in depth for the Devoid of Logic video on Season 7, but woof. The fact that this was the most hyped up period of the show, Daenerys arriving to Westeros like Aegon the Conqueror, and the way this all plays out is a complete joke. It's wholly underwhelming, nothing makes sense, and so many characters are compromised in this entire period of time. Number 47. Tyrion chooses Bran as king. There are still a lot of people divided on the overall plot point of Tyrion choosing Bran, which doesn't bother me that much, but the overall execution of the scene is absolutely abysmal. David and Dan rationalizing this pick with Tyrion's monologue about stories, I think is one of the worst written moments in the show, especially since Tyrion is supposed to be regarded as one of the smartest characters, and it's flat out disrespectful to Tywin's memory having him go on about this. It comes across as David and Dan trying to sell this genius revelation that they came up with, and it completely backfires and does the opposite. Then this entire point is completely devoid of conflict. Why is Grey Worm allowing this and bending over despite being set up as the opposite? Why is no one contesting the Starks gaining an immense amount of power? Why is Tyrion proposing a system of lords electing kings if it can easily be corruptible? Isn't that, one of the main points of the show? Shouldn't breaking the will be the opposite of this? Tyrion knows how corrupt people can be in King's Landing, so it's wild that he pitches this system. Like, the fact that this major point in the story is this shallow, I think is a testament to how little David and Dan cared about the writing by this point. Number 46, Stannis kills Shireen. I've kind of been slowly putting this lower in the ranking because it simultaneously ruins Stannis' character, and there were much better avenues to pursue this plot point. Two avenues could easily have been Melisandre going rogue, or his followers carrying out a mutiny and killing Shireen in a last-ditch attempt to bring the tide back in their favor. The fact that it's Stannis who carries this out is baffling for many reasons. One of the main ones being, leading up to this point, he's consumed about his general image. He doesn't want to be viewed as the king who ran, but simultaneously is okay with being the king who carries out kingslaying publicly. Something that everyone looks down on and should thus alienate more of his followers, actively working against his interests.
Many deserted before dawn.
Stannis should never want to be associated with that title. Not to mention that he kind of loves his daughter. You'd think the trauma of killing his brother would never want him to go down this avenue again. And this is all in the pursuit of maybe gaining favor from the gods, which even that is questionable because his faith in the Lord of Light is waning by the day. David and Dan literally do the opposite of setting up this plot point to artificially make it more shocking, which the actual event of her death is heartbreaking, but everything surrounding this is executed terribly and has zero narrative consistency. Number 45, Jaime leaves Brienne. This isn't really a moment that I considered as a plot twist, but I still think it counts. It's a sudden action that has a relatively big impact on the story moving forward. The main problem I take issue with here is Jaime regressing so heavily and seemingly out of nowhere. It's as if he gets post-nut clarity or something. Like, what even prompts this? Is he now just realizing that Cersei's fate is screwed? Has he truly loved her this whole time? Really? I can buy the fact that he'd want to see Cersei go into exile, but the way David and Dan write this scene where they absolutely crush the dynamic between these two characters is so distasteful. You can still have a confrontation between them, it's just the way it's written where Jaime dumps gasoline all over this relationship, drops the match, and then doesn't look at the explosion as he leaves Winterfell is flat out puzzling writing. Number 44, Missandei getting captured. This is another moment that I wasn't really considering as a plot twist, and I'm begrudgingly putting it in because it meets the criteria. I don't even know how Euron would obtain Missandei or even knows who she is. She only had one brief appearance in the Dragon Pit. Like, hey Cersei, I captured this translator/handmaid from Dany's ship. To which she'd be like, why the fuck would Dany care about this person? Why didn't you capture someone of importance like Grey Worm, Varys, or Tyrion? How does Cersei know that Missandei and Dany are even that close? That wasn't established to her. That'd be like capturing this serving girl from Cersei's side and trying to make Cersei surrender by threatening to kill her. It's just a nonsense plot point that feels like a forced outcome to make Dany more angry. Let's take a little break from the twist and talk about this video's sponsor, Squarespace. I love Squarespace because they're very practical and most people can make great use of their service. I personally got engaged a year ago, so I needed to make a website for my upcoming wedding. Surprisingly, it was so simple that it only took about 20 minutes to make, while also having a plethora of great website designs to choose from. There genuinely isn't a wrong choice you can make for picking out a design. You can also fundraise directly on the website, which is really nice for me because weddings are very expensive. If you're at all needing to make a website, then go to squarespace.com and they have a free trial. I have a 10% off discount code in the description, and by using my link, you also support this channel. Thanks again to Squarespace, and let's get back to the ranking. Number 43. Ilaria Martell carries out a coup. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if David and Dan were improvising the story from season to season, because there's no way Ilaria initiates this coup and everyone complies the second after Jaime leaves. Despite everyone being loyal literally an episode prior, nothing happens to warrant the Dornish Guard to switch allegiances. Was stuff happening off screen that was cut out? Ilaria was just arrested and now you're telling me that these same people want to overthrow Doran? Was Dorn Martell cancelled by the Me Too movement or something? Who fucking knows? The Dorn subplot is just cursed. Number 42. Jon kills Dany. This may seem relatively high, all things considered, but I think this general plot point is expected and is where the story should be going. This overall plot point is also made much worse by two different aspects. The first one being, again, that Dany transforms into an archetype instead of a fleshed out character that we understand. So going into this scene, I'm completely detached from feeling anything towards this character, making her death have a minuscule impact. The second aspect is that the consequences for Jon are laughable. Both Drogon and Grey Worm choose to spare him, which is utterly baffling. And I'm not even bringing up the thousands of Blood Riders that would be hunting down Jon. It's a plot twist that feels like it wasn't thought out at all, and unfortunately elicits nothing but apathy from me. Number 41. The trial for Arya is actually for Littlefinger. This is such a cheap and nonsense plot twist since I guess the whole development of Bran finally filling in his sisters that Littlefinger is a traitor happened off screen. This is better characterized as Littlefinger getting betrayed. I've gone into this a lot, but this was essentially an inevitable plot point driven by the fact that Peter is trying to carry out the craziest and wackiest plan of all time. Manipulating Arya with an inconsequential letter is ridiculous and forced, Arya getting to a point of threatening her sister is insanely rushed, and Sansa still trusting Peter is mind-boggling. I think this can be an effective twist had Sansa been playing Littlefinger from the beginning, using him to carry out her deeds and then betraying him, just like what she learned. So like the plot twist around this area of my ranking, the idea of this twist is conceptually correct, but is squandered by how it's achieved in the story. Number 40. Euron ambushes Yara's fleet. This is essentially the place in the narrative where every point in the story has like a dozen plot holes, further crippling the quality of these twists. Let's just throw out some questions for funsies. How did this fleet sneak up on Yara given spotters and crow's nests? Or on the flip side, how did Euron know they were even here? How did Euron know that this was going to be Dany's next move? Scouts are non-factors at this point in the narrative, so is he just gambling? What about the fleet carrying Grey Worm since they were taking the same route? Did they just ignore Grey Worm as his plot armor gave his fleet invisibility? Wouldn't delivering Dany's top general be a massive gift to Cersei? Was Euron expecting it to be nighttime during this ambush? How does Euron teleport to Yara's exact ship? Why do they leave Theon behind for seemingly no reason? But shh, don't think about all that. We got action, baby, so give this episode a 9 out of 10 on IMDb. Number 39. Dany kills the Callan Blood Riders. I think this plot twist is required and is a great way for Dany to establish a stranglehold on the Dothraki culture as her basically being this godlike entity to them. But the way she actually kills everyone inside is pretty comical. The fire spreading around as if the place is covered in gasoline and no one there trying to apprehend her is really silly. Also, I wish David and Dan leaned more into Dany being sociopathic here. They kind of wash out any negative stigma from the scene in that they make Khal Moro berate and throw heinous and demeaning insults at Dany, further justifying her burning these men alive, but she goes into the scene with the intention of already killing them. But hey, surely the later seasons will properly set her up for the Mad Queen arc in time. Number 38. Arya goes blind. This was a pretty crazy moment in the season 5 finale at the time, and looking back at it now, it's completely inconsequential. Outside of how she overcomes the wave, which was a good moment if you were overlooking the 5 minutes that preceded that scene. This twist is also made even worse because it's basically the narrative equivalent of putting your character in timeout. It doesn't actually feel like Arya is rightfully gaining back her sight and changing anything meaningful internally. Literally in the span of 2 scenes that take place over 5 minutes of screen time, she's allowed back into the House of Black and White, and then shortly thereafter is given her sight back. All they do to test her is ask her if she's no one and hit her with a stick. And given how prestigious and legendary this association is, you'd think this process would be more in-depth and elaborate to test her. Like, imagine the waif masquerading as this elderly woman trying to take care of Arya while she's a beggar, and they form an attachment. However, the waif tries to determine if Arya has actually divorced herself from her identity, and the second she realizes this, she's allowed back in, which would be another plot twist. In general, this twist of Arya going blind is utterly degraded by poor, rushed, and underdeveloped writing, and you can essentially remove this massive moment that happens to her, and nothing changes later. Number 37. Stannis saves the Night's Watch. This may be pretty surprising to you that I'm putting a moment from season 4 so low in the ranking, and the reason why this twist doesn't work well in the show is that it was specifically tailored to the events in A Storm of Swords. In the book, the battle for the wall takes place over about a week, making it feel like these heroes are desperately trying to hold out for as long as possible, hoping for a miracle. Until Stannis eventually comes in from Eastwatch and saves the day. So that duration in the show being less than 24 hours and Stannis coincidentally arriving in that time, when Jon is right about to die, is pretty insane timing, and just makes this feel like a cheap Deus Ex Machina, unfortunately. I don't even think they explain how they got here in the show, they just show up. So yeah, the execution of this twist feels haphazardly done, and is shocking more in the sense that you're just confused as to how this is even happening. Along with it undercutting the immense weight of the ending of the last episode. Number 36. The High Sparrow takes Cersei prisoner. This would be a good twist if it wasn't painfully obvious that the High Sparrow was intending on betraying Cersei. For someone so previously adept and entrenched in playing the Game of Thrones, the fact that she can't see this veil threat is crazy. Maybe if David and Dan played down the aspect of the High Sparrow subtly threatening her, then they'd be able to make it come across that Cersei genuinely didn't see this coming. However, when it's made really obvious to the audience, then it actively degrades Cersei's character since she used to be astute and observant. Number 35. Dany getting captured by the Dothraki. This is a really odd twist because, like, sure, you can have a few random Dothraki chance upon Dany, but I guess David and Dan wanted to imbue this plot twist with the entire Khalasar showing up, which doesn't make any sense and is only here for spectacle. The only impression this gives me is that David and Dan wanted to artificially increase how big and massive this twist was, despite not caring that it's complete lunacy. Also, the whole Dragon Pit set piece can be seen as a plot twist as well. I'm just associating the primary change in the narrative to this specific twist. Number 34. Sandor Clegane is alive. I'm personally not a big fan of this twist, even though Sandor is one of my favorite characters. For a show that prides itself on having gutting and massive moments in the narrative where characters die, it should be a rare event in which characters come back. However, they already did that this season with Jon, and you can also make the case for Arya. So really the only point to bring back characters from the dead is to serve a major purpose in the narrative, which goes into the point of, why are we actually bringing back Sandor? His redemption arc was finished with him standing up for and protecting Arya, so having him join the Brotherhood without banners is pretty odd considering that he's not religious, he hates fire and the Lord of Light, and flat out dislikes his company there. To me, this smells like David and Dan are forcing this to happen because Sandor is a fan favorite character. If his main usage in the story from this point is to relapse and carry out revenge, then why is he bothering with fighting the dead? It's a weird side tangent for his character and kind of muddles his entire arc. Number 33. Ser Jorah captures Tyrion. I will be honest, I think it's a little convenient that Ser Jorah chances into Tyrion in this random brothel in this specific city at this specific time. If Ser Jorah was working off of rumors that a dwarf with a massive scar was in town, then I think this would be better. Although, coincidences in stories are generally fine as long as they aren't heavily abundant or are extremely unlikely, and I feel like this twist borderlines on being a bit too unlikely. But regardless, I do think this is a good character pairing, and Tyrion and Ser Jorah have some strong moments together. Number 32. Hodor. On retrospect, this isn't actually a plot twist, and I wrote out and recorded a whole segment for this moment, but it's really just a shocking revelation. Hodor's death and what we learn here doesn't twist the story into a new direction. It's just kinda crazy how inconsequential this entire moment is. Like nothing coming of Bran learning he can affect the past. Coincidentally though, I overlooked a twist that happens to roughly be here quality-wise, which is Benjen Stark being alive. Not a massive twist in the sense of its bearing on the plot, and it's really just a powerful moment. Although it overall felt like David and Dan didn't know what to do with this character. It makes way more sense for Benjen to be involved with Bran's journey from the second they cross the wall like in the books, especially if the Three-Eyed Raven is anticipating their arrival. The way it is in the show makes it seem like, what the hell has he been doing this whole time? I guess the reasoning for this was so that Bran and them would get captured. However, that now raises an inconsistency of this chess piece not being utilized. Not as terrible as other twists, and it was satisfying seeing Bran reconnecting with Benjen. Number 31. The Night King resurrects Viserion. This is a puzzling twist to rank because everything leading up to this moment was terrible, but the actual plot twist was exciting, given its implications for the future. It turns an already terrifying threat into being practically insurmountable. It's kind of unfortunate though that the undead dragon didn't really feel like it was a consistent threat throughout the battle. Almost as if the Night King actually using the dragon would have meant that our heroes would have been screwed. Also, I'm technically not including the wall falling down as a twist, since it's expected from this point in the story, so if it makes you feel better, we can pair that moment to this twist. Number 30. Jaime leaves Cersei. This was really the only thing from Season 7 that wasn't irreparably damaged. This character relation twist I think is a powerful moment, albeit I still think it's flawed in the sense of motivations. Cersei undermining her relationship with Jaime actively goes against her wants, and this is all spurred because Jaime was forced into a meeting with Tyrion without his consent. That he immediately reports to Cersei, by the way, and now she doesn't trust him anymore. And then for Jaime, his motivation is misplaced in that he says he's breaking the vow of going north, but Cersei was the one that promised that and was actively lying to gain an advantage. So I wish Jaime was more or less leaving Cersei because he wants to fight for the living, and not because of a made-up technicality. It's the correct direction for these characters, but just slightly messed up with its execution. Number 29. Daenerys getting betrayed in Qarth. I'm also going to pair Dany losing her dragons here as they serve the same point. But the more you think about this twist, it starts to unravel and becomes mediocre in a lot of different ways. Firstly, them thinking that Dany would be on their side after they actively kill all of the 13 is pretty wild. Then Private Pre's reasoning for keeping Dany is a little odd because it's to make the dragons happy as the dragon's awakening rekindled his magic. But does their happiness correlate with magic strength? And the whole notion of dragons being imbued with magic is never explored after this point. Another thing is that Xaro for some reason is sleeping with one of Dany's handmaids, which is really confusing considering that he should want power and thus Dany and her dragons. He does become king of Qarth, but A, dragons, and B, his coup/power grab is kind of shallow in terms of us exploring the ramifications and how the city would even react to that. I also feel the way this general twist is communicated in the show actively makes Dany seem a bit obtuse, because in A Clash of Kings, she identifies that in order to make potential allies, she has to take great risks. If she's always closing herself off to new people out of fear of getting betrayed, then she physically can't advance herself power-wise. So overall, this twist feels significantly less thought out, the motivations are puzzling, and it portrays Dany's character in a worse light. Number 28. Jon Snow gets resurrected. Now, undoing a massive twist can feel cheap, but the way it's done here is plausible and it makes sense. I don't necessarily take issue with this twist, and more in the fact that Jon's character doesn't meaningfully change enough. There needs to be a tangible and internal rift within Jon's soul, and whenever Winds of Winter comes out, I assume that'll be much better developed as exploring the internal state of a character is much easier in that medium. Then, another thing for this twist is that all the pieces for Jon Snow's resurrection are conveniently in place to the point that this twist really isn't that surprising. If you're going into a Jon Snow resurrection scene, then he's probably going to get resurrected at the end of it. Everything surrounding this moment in the narrative is also kind of dumb, but this is still undoubtedly a strong and satisfying moment. Number 27. Catelyn letting Jaime go. This is a big decision that comes out of nowhere for Catelyn, completely catching the audience off guard, while also highlighting her inner character flaws in that she'll do anything to get her children back, even if it happens to worsen Robb's position in the war. I think this is the primary moment where fans truly started to hate Catelyn, even though I'd argue that flawed characters are the best type of characters. Then for Jaime, this is the start of a great direction and is arguably one of the best journeys and subplots in the show, hosting some amazing moments of payoff and catharsis. And what this does for the inner turmoil in Robb's ranks is really interesting because how do you punish your mother? It's an interesting conundrum. Number 26. Ramsay is not Theon's friend. The Ramsay reveal in A Clash of Kings I thought was brilliant, and this reveal also serves a pretty great purpose. It perfectly sets up Ramsay's character in that it both shows a complete psychopathic disregard in caring for his own men, while also displaying a high level of intelligence in carrying out this mind game to get on Theon's side and thus learning more information. Although Ramsay doesn't really prod that much for information, and Theon randomly starts talking about how he didn't actually kill Bran and Rickon. This isn't that big of a deal because Theon isn't the brightest bloke in the Seven Kingdoms. I just especially like how it punctuates a strong moment of regret in Theon's character. He truly is more of a Stark than a Greyjoy, and seeing him come to terms with that was an excellent character moment that paid off right before he became Reek. Number 25. Daenerys getting her dragons. Technically, this is a plot twist, and judging this solely as a plot twist, I'm putting it around the middle since it's not that surprising. But it's more or less not surprising because literally everyone going into the show knows that there'll be dragons. If you were somehow watching the show without that knowledge, then I think it's a pretty exciting twist that drastically changes the story moving forward. If that was the case, then it would be in my personal top 20, but as an actual ending to season 1, I think it's outstanding. Number 24. The death of Myrcella. This is easily one of the better scenes in season 5, and even past that, this scene would have been an all-timer if Myrcella was given more development and we cared more about her. Because prior to this, she had like a couple scenes. However, this twist surprisingly still has a strong impact. A daughter dying in the arms of her father, just learning the truth of his identity, and sharing one last happy moment together before a tragic end is a great recipe for a scene, regardless of your attachment to the characters. In terms of the actual plot twist aspect, this isn't a crazy turning point in the narrative, and it doesn't create any massive tsunamis or anything, but it's still a nice little golden nugget within the mediocrity of season 5. Number 23. Theon getting betrayed. In terms of how this was written and executed, I really love how this absolutely comes out of nowhere during Theon's climax in his speech. It allows him to still have a true moment of glory before his downfall. It perfectly sets the stage for a grueling upcoming journey for Theon and makes complete sense for his men to betray him here. This is also made even more tragic given that Theon had a way out, but actively denied it from his sheer ego. Then before moving on, I think Alfie Allen delivers an all-time performance here. Easily one of the most overlooked actors in Game of Thrones.
It was a good speech. Didn't want to interrupt.
Number 22. The death of Robert Baratheon. Narratively, this plot twist is essentially set up as being an inevitability. However, its timing is still relatively surprising because you'd think his assassination would be more stereotypical or grand, but it happening while he's hunting is inherently a subversion of that expectation. It happens at a point where Ned finally regains his footing and solves the mystery of Cersei and Jaime's incest and why they push Bran out of the window. This twist is the embodiment of the narrative being upended right before a potential happy ending. It's not as crazy as others, but its timing perfectly sets the story on a path of exciting destruction. And the actual scene itself is pretty iconic.
Give me some of the pain and let me die.
Number 21. The Mutiny at Craster's. We're starting to enter the point in this ranking of great twists, and the fact that there are 21 of them is pretty insane. Now, at 21, the mutiny at Craster's may not be very shocking, as it was kind of like a pot slowly boiling over. However, seeing Jorah Mormont die in this fashion was the main shocking point. It's a perfect death for a character who represents honor. Literally, the most unhonorable death he could have gotten was getting stabbed in the back, and that's really what drives this moment into being outstanding. And then Jorah Mormont still being able to fight back when this happened illustrates how much of a badass he was. This also spices up a plotline that was starting to get a little stale and further destabilizes the Night's Watch, making them overcoming the upcoming battle for the Wall seem even more impossible. Number 20. Tommen kills himself. Maybe a bit of surprise to you, as this is a small and quiet moment, but I feel its lack of explosiveness and how it's presented is brilliant. Especially in how it's shot. When Tommen leaves frame and we sit here for an unnaturally long time, something is immediately wrong. It breaks the rules of editing and general storytelling in that you have to convey information through cinematography, and then it clicks. You realize that by focusing on this window for so long, it only insinuates that Tommen is coming back to it, leading to one outcome. Outstanding and reserved storytelling in which Miguel's direction is probably uplifting the story with his creativity. In terms of plot impact, this is of course a massive moment, and again, I just love how they downplay this moment by immediately cutting to a different subplot. This twist may not have the shock factor of the last one, but I really respect this moment because it's kind of like an anti-twist. Number 19. Catelyn seizing Tyrion. I really love what this twist does for the story. It's such a sudden and exciting direction that infuses the narrative with this catalytic spark that ignites the entire show into chaos. Like, you can basically track back a lot of the bad things that happened to this moment. This singular twist is proof that Game of Thrones' world feels tangible and lived in. The fact that events taking place on the other side of the continent drastically affects other areas punctuates the interconnectedness of Westeros, further bolstering the weight of politics and houses being on the cusp of war. Not to mention that, on a micro level, this gives characters immense agency, and their personal choices having this crazy impact is a magnificent sign for how great the writing is. Number 18. Dany betrays Kraznys. Kind of a twist, but more so in the sense that we don't know if she has a plan and what it is going into this scene. To me though, I really think this is the turning point for Daenerys' character that was kind of floundering around a bit in terms of gaining power and influence, to finally having a great victory, showcasing her intelligence while also establishing one of Dany's core ideals moving forward, that of liberation of slaves and killing the masters. It's basically the reveal of Dany's overall identity and gives her a tangible and relatable objective outside of just trying to get to Westeros. Looking at the actual scene, the way it's laid out plays perfectly, and just when the audience is fooled, Dany subverts the scene in an explosively cathartic moment of Drogon burning Kraznys. Even revealing that she speaks the same language as him was great, adding more nuance and discoverability to her past scenes with him. So yeah, this loosely fits the definition of a plot twist, but what it achieves in terms of how it changes the narrative is still pretty groundbreaking. Number 17. Tyrion declares a trial by combat. This twist is really elevated by the insane rush of Tyrion's monologue, an absolute turning point for his character as he lashes out and breaks down in front of everyone. It may not be a major surprise that Tyrion chooses a trial by combat here, given that it was used in Season 1, and you may argue that that's also a twist, but the way it's presented doesn't really feel like a major twist. For this instance, it does. The entire season has been building to this point of Tyrion being out of options and being powerless. He knows that the trial is going to be rigged, and Tywin is specifically planning to leverage that against Jaime, having him leave the Kingsguard and accept his inheritance of Casterly Rock. So Tyrion exploding in this tsunami of emotions that's incited especially by Shay's crushing testimony is outstanding, and he plays his final card. And even then, it would be a miracle if Bronn or Jaime accepted being his champion. So this may seem like an obvious point, but the more you think about it, it's a terrible option that Tyrion should not look forward to. Number 16. The Night King shows up at Hardhome. Without Hardhome, Season 5 would be wholly lackluster, and this twist punctuates how big of a deal the undead threat is. Because prior to this, the fight at the Fist of the First Men was completely skipped over, and in general, it was much more terrifying in the books. This twist rectifies that and reintroduces that this conflict truly is the most important thing in the show. It comes out of nowhere, and you can technically argue that it's a major coincidence that Jon arriving here coincides with the Night King also arriving. However, its low plausibility is made up by how great of a point it is in the story, pretty much reaffirming from this point on that this is Jon's primary objective. Then there's also, of course, the aspect of how great this actual sequence is, because the fact that it goes down as this massacre further increases the severity of this twist, along with having one of the most iconic moments in the show. Number 15. The death of Renly. Probably one of the most unfortunate and heartbreaking twists, because Renly's support and power was likely going to be the best outcome to a good ending in Game of Thrones. However, Stannis snuffing him out puts the narrative on this darker and more conflict-ridden path, and it's done so in such a nuanced and interesting way. Not just in the sense that magic killed Renly, which does act as an intriguing spice of flavor that is annoyingly downplayed from here on out, but the character dynamic between Renly and Stannis is riveting. They're on two ends of the spectrum, both representing drastically different ideals. So this leading to Renly's death is great, and I would probably put it slightly higher had this had been more surprising. Not saying that I dislike seeing Davos's perspective of this event, it just inherently subtracts from the shocking nature of this scene. Also wouldn't mind this moment weighing on Stannis a bit more. Number 14. Jon Snow is a Targaryen. In terms of this twist in the show, I feel it's alluded to way less than it is in the books, making it even more surprising. But just the notion of Jon's identity of actually being a Targaryen is fucking insane. It's such an insane plot point that David and Dan decide to play it out 3 separate times. Although, I'm primarily focusing on the Season 6 reveal, as that was the first. The way it's communicated here, I think, is also a display of outstanding craftsmanship, using a match cut of this baby to Jon, insinuating that they are the same person. Now, in terms of this twist actually affecting the plot, it unfortunately feels relatively inconsequential by the end. It still does play a part in the narrative, like driving a wedge between Dany and Jon, sabotaging their romance, but outside of that, his lineage doesn't feel like it plays as big of a part as it should have. And then there's also the notion that Jon should have a massive identity crisis, and instead, it just feels like he's kind of in denial about it and is downplaying it at every turn. Maybe if David and Dan actually slowed down the pace, and we explored the internal state of Jon's character through dialogue scenes, then this would be more interesting. In terms of ranking this though, I still think it's a great twist that sadly doesn't have as strong of an impact on the plot than it should have had. Number 13. Tyrion kills Tywin. Just wow. Like, you'd assume that Jaime would save Tyrion, which I guess is also a plot twist that's being bundled here, but I would have never have assumed that Tyrion would go as far as killing his father. It acts as a perfect ending between these two characters that's been getting built up in this ferocious way since the beginning of Season 3, establishing the immense hate and prejudice Tywin has towards Tyrion. So Tyrion being able to finally realize his revenge in the most ironic way is flat out genius. The most powerful man dying to his dwarf son, and while also on a toilet. Even the location of his death means everything here, and it elevates the irony tenfold. Then how the scene is written and Tyrion having one last honest conversation with his father, Tywin's sly and devious nature trying to deceive Tyrion, and then everything breaks down when Tywin can't help but call Shay a whore. punctuating his complete lack of sympathy while also exposing how ignorant he is towards Tyrion's love for Shay. He can't even comprehend loving someone of that status. Then, from here on out, Tywin's death sets the King's Landing path on an even more treacherous route. It's just too bad that the writing declines from here, and I'd love to see David and Dan write a more compelling Season 5 King's Landing plot. Number 12. Littlefinger killing Lysa Arryn. Easily one of the most iconic deaths in the show, right next to Tyrion killing Tywin. Although, I'd say this moment is way more surprising and comes out of nowhere. I know it's kind of Littlefinger's MO to betray people, but Lysa was so fickle and easily manipulated to the point that you didn't really assume that he'd actually kill her. However, forcing his hand in an improvisational feat to save Sansa, given that, he loves her, unlike in the later seasons, is an outstanding point for his character, marking the biggest point in his entire life and completely reshapes the subplot in the Vale moving forward. It is a little annoying though that the Vale subplot is wholly underdeveloped after this point, but in terms of weighing that against the actual quality of this twist, feels like a fool's errand because the worsening quality of the later seasons equally impacts basically everything. This twist, though, is essentially classic Game of Thrones, an exciting betrayal in the name of taking power, and of course, the way Lysa dies is juicily serenaded in irony. Number 11. Oberyn becomes Tyrion's champion. It's kind of funny that these two twists essentially happen back to back and also happen to be right next to each other on my list. To me, Oberyn becoming Tyrion's champion edges out Littlefinger killing Lysa because it truly comes at a time where Tyrion is at an absolute low point. He was just denied by his two closest friends in the world, creating this inescapable feeling that Tyrion is screwed. But now, this new character comes to his aid. And if you're paying attention, everything points to the fact that Oberyn would want to fight the Mountain, but it's still written in a way that it comes across as a major surprise. That and just the scene itself from a writing and acting standpoint is wholly captivating. Seeing Oberyn's monologue diving into his perspective of experiencing the injustices faced by Tyrion is engrossing and slowly draws you to a point of deeply sympathizing with Tyrion. Then, this is all punctuated with that monumental turn that Tyrion does in fact have a champion, acting as a huge release of joy and euphoria. Number 10. Khal Drogo becoming a husk. I think it's a pretty groundbreaking subversion, propping up Khal Drogo as being this badass leader that ultimately dies in this unexpected way, forcing Dany to become her own leader and amass her own strength, indirectly invigorating her as a character. In any other show, the writers would be too afraid to kill Khal Drogo, but George R. R. Martin dared to off this character and in the process, created an unpredictable path for the story. This also comes at a point in the narrative where Drogo finally promises to go to Westeros and fight for Dany's cause, marking an arc in their relationship that started out as being transactional and devoid of passion, into being full of love and devotion, making this twist even more excruciatingly tragic. And also just the way he dies imbues the show with this realism in that even the strongest warriors are vulnerable, although he technically dies because Miri poisons him and not because of an infection. Then the actual death scene as well is such a depressing end to their once vibrant and lovely romance. Number 9. Jaime loses his hand. In terms of unexpectedness, this comes out of nowhere. Jaime up until this point has felt untouchable, and he definitely rubbed that aspect into every character's face. So seeing that finally has a breaking point for someone, and them choosing to take his hand perfectly initiates one of the best and most likely the best arc in the show. This moment single-handedly turns Jaime into being an iconic character, forcing him to snap out of this spoiled mentality, and it also helps Jaime shed his Kingslayer persona. His skill as a fighter was the embodiment of his ego, and him losing that forces him to embrace his inner self, going down a legendary path of redemption. Number 8. The death of Jon Snow. This is a hard twist to judge because I can perfectly understand people not loving this twist because he's resurrected 2 episodes later. With that said though, it's easily the most insane ending to any season in the show. If you were watching Game of Thrones as it was releasing, then you had to wait a year with this ending hanging over your head. That alone, I think, speaks to how great this twist was, and it may be a fake out in terms of killing your main character, but it does make sense for him to be resurrected, as I mentioned earlier in the video, for that twist. Especially since this isn't like a brand new mechanic or anything, and has happened to Beric multiple times. Albeit, it is questionable in terms of Jon's actual role in the Long Night, and going down that rabbit hole would be too mind-numbing and time-consuming. The main critique I have for this twist, though, that is minor, is that I wish Ollie and Jon's relationship was built up more. The current ending is still great and plays as a major betrayal, but imagine how much harder this would impact you if these two characters were much closer. Outside of that, though, everyone coming in to stab Jon one by one is tragic, and that wide shot that slowly pulls out is just, the perfect way to end this season. Number 7. Bran getting pushed out of the window. I'm probably putting this higher than I should be, and I'm primarily doing so because this twist does a ton of heavy lifting for hooking you into the show. This is the moment that sells the entire narrative to the viewer, while also laying down the foundation for a riveting season-long mystery and general wider conflict between these great houses. Kind of like Season 4, opening a season with a massive twist to drive the intrigue is just a great way to make your season of television more consistently engaging. Every character is working to solve this mystery, giving them a captivating sense of agency, and it further throws the narrative in this exciting and early direction. That, and this is the primary inciting incident of Game of Thrones, alongside Jon Arryn's death, of course. So I feel like that should also boost this twist to a pretty high point in my ranking. Number 6. Cersei blows up the Sept. This twist is really carried by Miguel Sapochnik and Ramin Djawadi randomly waking up one day, deciding that they wanted to make a magnum opus. For some people, I can see them putting this even higher, but there is an air of like, you're kind of expecting Cersei to do this. However, that's made up for how massive and grand this point is in the story. It pays off so many seasons worth of development, and so much to the point that I wouldn't have minded for at least one of these characters to have survived, giving Cersei more of a challenge to overcome within the city in Season 7, because after this point, King's Landing feels pretty empty. And I guess that's kind of the trade-off for having one of the most explosive twists in the show. Never would you have imagined that we'd have another Red Wedding-esque scenario in which multiple major characters die in a single instance. Then outside of the story aspect, the cinematography, acting, wardrobe, music, VFX, editing, everything comes together at its absolute high point and manifests this deeply euphoric moment in the story, marking by far the last high point in Game of Thrones. Number 5. The Death of Joffrey. Even putting this twist at number 5 seems criminal, and that's really just a testament to the insanity of plot twists in Game of Thrones. This twist is pretty crazy because narratively this comes right after the Red Wedding, so surely we're not going to have another wedding massacre, right, George? But Joffrey suddenly getting poisoned in the most bombastic way comes at the perfect point in the story, a point in which Joffrey's cruelty is at an all-time high, publicly humiliating Tyrion in front of everyone. The performances on display here are incredible, and Cersei's especially is career-defining, both showing immense and raw anger and her love for her children that's slowly dwindling away. Then this also invigorates the entire King's Landing subplot with a gripping and exciting narrative that only gets better from here. This plot twist is purely the embodiment of a story that can consistently pull out masterful moments, and you're just shocked at how the show can keep getting higher in terms of quality. Number 4. Littlefinger betraying Ned. Outside of Bran getting pushed out of the window, this is the first time where a plot twist really catches you off guard, setting a precedence of a story that takes great risks and goes in daring directions that are incredible and laced with immense conflict. The way this plot twist is executed is truly surprising, while also making complete sense. I especially like the fact that this may seem like Littlefinger is the main betrayer here, but it's actually fundamentally Ned that betrays Ned. This twist is the personification of Eddard failing at the Game of Thrones, both in him turning down the support of Renly and Peter in the name of acting honorably. This is a story that applies a gritty and realistic approach to its world, and honor, while it may be commendable, can oftentimes be someone's downfall. This is essentially a common motif throughout Game of Thrones, and this is the primary point that illustrates it the best. I personally love that general theme, and this may not be as crazy as the Death of Joffrey, but what this twist does in terms of shaping our expectations and the narrative moving forward, I think is truly game-changing. Number 3. The Mountain killing Oberyn. This and the next 3 twists are wholly shocking and caused me to stare at my screen like Tyrion in complete bewilderment for at least 5 minutes. I just love how this particular twist is written, in which it plays into that stereotypical approach in which you think the main character will win, but it's subverted at the very last second with Oberyn dying, while also making that moment actually make sense in terms of Oberyn not killing the Mountain yet and trying to get a confession. The actual death as well is just so gruesome to the point that it throws the shocking aspect of this twist into the stratosphere. You can definitely make the case for this being the best death in the show. From an overall narrative standpoint, Tyrion has been in King's Landing for so long that it's completely unknowable where his story would go outside of this location. It's become a part of his identity, further fueling the notion that there's no way Tyrion can lose here. Given the low number of possible endings for this scene, George R. R. Martin somehow unlocked an ending that no one could have foreseen. Number 2. The death of Ned Stark. I think it's pretty indisputable what the top 2 twists should be in Game of Thrones, and even then, it's crazy that George R. R. Martin was able to surpass an already masterpiece of a twist that's regarded as being one of the greatest of all time. Killing your main character is fundamentally a groundbreaking twist, being the pinnacle of the notion of subverting expectations. And the thing that makes this even more surprising is that the narrative had a perfect way out for Ned to survive, and that's what the audience expects to happen. So his death essentially being a decision made on the whim of one character is insane. It lays a future precedence in that this is an untraditional story going down audacious avenues that also exemplifies that George is so confident to the point that he can still tell a compelling and rich story without its first main character. Then past that, Ned's death simultaneously skyrockets Joffrey's status as a villain, and it drastically changes the dynamic between him and Sansa into being something far more sinister. And of course, the twist obviously establishes the immense stakes in that if Ned can die, then any protagonist can die, echoing the raw vulnerability of characters in Game of Thrones. Number 1. The Red Wedding. It's crazy to kill one main protagonist, but doing that again is just mentally insane, along with snuffing out the entire subplot that they're inhabiting. This is easily the most shocking and innovative twist in the entire show. It completely upends the narrative with this rippling earthquake that impacts every subplot from how seismic it is. And like true Game of Thrones fashion, it's not cheap in any way. There are so many details alluding to this outcome, and the cherry on top is when the Reigns of Castamere starts playing, filling the air with this heavy and crushing dread. Then the actual deed is perfectly infused with ultra-violence, further enhancing the shock factor of the scene. It's so intense to the point that you enter a state of being in denial about what's actually happening, marking a true achievement in being one of the best twists and how much you love these characters. The performances on display as well are truly traumatizing and aid that fact. This scene alone is probably why you recommended your friends to watch the show, you sly little devil. You know you wanted to record them in their anguish. But yeah, easily the most wholesome scene in the show, and I'm desperately trying to convince my fiance to let me play the Reigns of Castamere at our wedding. That's it. Only 51 twists. Imagine there not being more. And this is also with me primarily focusing on the major plot twists, because there are a lot of micro plot twists that happen throughout the show, along with some big moments not really being twists in that we knew they were going to happen, like the Vale arriving and Tywin coming to King's Landing's aid. Thank you for watching, and let me know in the comments what your top 10 or 5 twists are. My Letterboxd, Discord, and Patreon links are in the description, and have a nice day. Thank you incredibly to my top patrons Logan Farmer and Simply Put.